The Capitol's press room buzzed with a rare mix of tension and spectacle. It was supposed to be just another night of commentary on American Voices, a new primetime political roundtable hosted by CNN. But an unexpected leak sent media circuits into a frenzy. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Karoline Leavitt had both confirmed to appear live, on the same stage, for the first time. Producers weren't even sure how it happened. AOC had originally been booked solo to promote her climate justice initiative, but when Karoline's press team learned of it, they submitted a formal request. If AOC is on air, Karoline will be there too, with her binder. The binder. The very word struck fear into many Democrats. No one quite knew what was in it, but when Karoline brought it on air, something always blew up. Emails, funding receipts, committee transcripts. It was her weapon of choice. AOC, on the other hand, wasn't intimidated. When CNN asked if she'd still be willing to participate in the live roundtable with Karoline, her response was brief. "I've dealt with louder. Let her come." The moment was already viral before the cameras even rolled. Clips of the promo trailer, 2 voices, 1 stage, no scripts, had racked up millions of views across X and TikTok. Both camps knew what was at stake. Karoline had grown into a formidable voice in the new conservative movement, fast, fearless, and surgically prepared. AOC, a cultural icon in progressive politics, had never faced someone her age, her demographic, with such an opposite worldview and such relentless bite. Backstage, Karoline tightened the microphone on her lapel. Her black suit was sharp, unembellished, except for the gold cross around her neck. It was never just an accessory, it was her line in the sand, a declaration that her values were not up for negotiation. Her binder sat on the table beside her, stuffed with marked-up documents and yellow sticky notes. The final page was paper-clipped, an unredacted email chain that her team had confirmed as authentic. Meanwhile, AOC reviewed her notes calmly, wrapped in a deep green blazer, radiating the poise of a seasoned communicator. Her team had advised restraint, to keep it cool, to not get baited. "Karoline wants you flustered. Don't let her drag you into one of her Fox-style firestorms," one aide whispered. But AOC, in her heart, wasn't worried. "Let her bring the noise," she said under her breath. "I'll bring the truth." As the countdown to airtime began, CNN's host stood center stage, gripping his note cards with visible tension. The screen behind him lit up with the program's logo, American Voices, red versus blue, the new generation. The crowd hushed. 5 seconds, the producer signaled. Karoline glanced at her binder. AOC exhaled slowly. The nation had no idea what was coming next. The opening montage had barely faded when the tension in the studio hit full tilt. The crowd, carefully curated to include independents, students, and press, leaned forward in silence as the cameras zoomed in. CNN's host, David Lang, flashed a nervous smile. "Tonight," he began, "we're joined by 2 of the most influential political voices of their generation. On my left, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York. On my right, former White House press secretary and political commentator Karoline Leavitt." Polite applause followed, though neither woman clapped for the other. AOC sat tall, arms neatly crossed. Karoline offered a brief nod, but her gaze didn't waver from the host, or the table in front of her where her infamous binder now lay unopened. Lang's first question was scripted, neutral, the kind meant to ease guests in. "We're here tonight to discuss solutions, so let's begin there. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, you've proposed a Green Future initiative. Could you summarize its core goals?" AOC launched smoothly into her answer, her voice calm and practiced. "It's about economic transition, climate justice, jobs that honor both labor and sustainability. We've invested in top-line research. But more than that, we're centering the communities that have long been ignored." But she was interrupted. Karoline shifted forward, her voice firm. You mean communities ignored by Democrats until election season rolls around? The crowd gasped. Lang raised his hand. Miss Leavitt, we'll give you time in a moment. But Karoline wasn't waiting. This initiative is a PR stunt, she said, flipping open her binder with a single motion. I have the documents right here. Proposals buried with vague language funneling billions to pet projects in blue districts. Zero accountability, zero impact. AOC's composure hardened. You want to play paperwork games, Karoline? She said. But people's lives aren't bullet points. We're creating jobs. You're quoting tweets. Karoline raised a brow. Tweets? Congresswoman, I'm quoting line items from your own proposal. Page 17, Community Resilience Fund, $1.3 billion, no audit process, no measurable benchmarks, no plan. David Lang stammered, trying to regain control. Let's allow some space here. Congresswoman, would you like to respond? AOC turned toward Karoline, voice still steady but sharper now. What you're doing is political theater. You carry that binder around like it's the Constitution, but it's a prop. A desperate attempt to look serious while you undercut real policy with rehearsed sound bites. The crowd rippled, some clapping, some murmuring. Karoline didn't flinch. She reached for a paper clipped near the front and held it up. This isn't theater. It's your staff's internal memo advising to bury Section 4 to avoid scrutiny from small business associations. Shall I read the rest out loud? Lang's eyes widened. Is that an authenticated document? Karoline nodded. Confirmed last night. The room fell into momentary silence. AOC glanced at her team off camera. Someone whispered. Her jaw clenched. And then she did what Karoline had been waiting for. She leaned back and smirked. She's just a MAGA puppet, AOC said, loud enough for the cameras. A walking memo, trained to perform, not to lead. Karoline paused. A breath. Then she smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. The script was about to be torn, literally and figuratively. Karoline reached down, cool and deliberate, flipping through her binder until she landed on the page she'd been waiting to reveal, the one printed not just with policy critiques, but with the internal staff communications she'd teased moments before. Without hesitation, she held it up to the camera. This, she said, is the document AOC's office hoped you'd never see. David Lang leaned in nervously. Miss Leavitt, before you continue... She didn't wait. She held the page in the air, her eyes never leaving Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, then slowly and deliberately tore it down the center. The sound of ripping paper sliced through the studio louder than any applause or gasp. It was symbolic. It was calculated. It was war. The crowd froze. Some gasped audibly. One man in the second row muttered, "No way." AOC blinked. Once, twice, then narrowed her eyes. You brought a paper stunt to a policy debate? Karoline didn't miss a beat. That wasn't a stunt. That was your mask coming off, and I'm here to make sure every American sees who you really are. Not the Instagram filter, not the slogans, not the carefully curated sound bites. Just facts, just consequences. AOC sat back, arms crossed again, visibly restraining herself, but her tone sharpened. You can rip all the paper you want, Karoline. It doesn't change that you're a mouthpiece for a movement that punishes the poor, fears science, and thrives on chaos. Karoline leaned in. That's rich coming from someone who fundraises off of protests, takes photo ops at fences, and disappears when the cameras stop rolling. You talk justice. I'm talking results. Lang interjected quickly, trying to mediate. Ladies, let's keep this focused. But the moment had broken containment. Karoline glanced at the camera and then addressed the audience directly, breaking the fourth wall. Millions of Americans are sick of being talked down to by politicians who think charisma can cover for corruption. This isn't about MAGA or progressive hashtags. This is about truth. And if calling out hypocrisy makes me a puppet, then I say this. Better a puppet of accountability than a queen of theatrics. Gasps. A scattered burst of applause from the right side of the room. AOC sat upright now, her voice rising. Theatrics? Karoline, you're the product of a political machine that was built to divide. I've lived the struggle. I've marched with the people. You've read about them on briefings. You're not one of them. Karoline didn't blink. I was raised in a blue-collar family. My parents didn't need a camera to make ends meet. You say you march with the people. I live with them. The temperature in the studio kept rising. David Lang finally turned to the control booth, mouthing, "Go to break?" But before anyone could cut the segment, Karoline locked eyes with AOC again. You called me a puppet, but you recite the same talking points every time someone challenges your narrative. I don't need strings. I've got a spine. The screen behind them flickered. Social media feeds were already on fire. On Twitter, #CarolineRips was trending. On Truth Social, Trump had already reposted the clip with the caption, "She's a fighter." In that moment, the debate had stopped being a conversation and became something else. A national moment. A cultural clash. Two visions of America colliding under hot lights and cold scrutiny. And Karoline? She was just getting started. By the time the studio returned from commercial break, the control room was in chaos. Producers shouted into earpieces. Ratings data was already pouring in. Viewer engagement had spiked off the charts. But inside the stage, a heavier silence lingered, charged and unstable like the moments before a storm. David Lang tried to calm the atmosphere with a soft smile. Welcome back. We're live with Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt. Things got spirited before the break. Karoline sat perfectly still, spine straight, her face calm but electric with confidence. AOC adjusted her mic as if bracing for the next volley. Lang tried to take control. Let's shift gears slightly. Congresswoman, do you regret calling Miss Leavitt a MAGA puppet earlier in the program? Alexandria leaned forward, voice slow, deliberate. Number, because it wasn't personal. It was accurate. She represents an ideology, not individual conviction. Everything she says is designed to appease a political cult. Karoline's lips curled into a slight smile, almost amused. And yet here I am, no teleprompter, no advisors in my ear, just truth. AOC pressed on, her voice rising. Truth? You defend a man who tried to overturn an election, who separated families at the border, who called white supremacists very fine people. That's not truth, Karoline. That's complicity. Karoline's tone hardened. That's a narrative, not a fact. You call out border policies, yet ignore the illegal immigrant crime stats under Obama. You cry for justice, but were silent when inner-city violence spiked in your own district. You want America to feel shame. I want it to find strength. The crowd reacted again, this time louder. A mix of gasps, boos, and applause. Some leaned forward, others folded arms, but everyone was locked in. David Lang tried to moderate. Let's keep the discussion productive. But neither woman heard him anymore. Karoline turned back to Alexandria. You speak about democracy like you're its only guardian. But when students protest you, you call them misinformed. When critics push back, you block them on social media. Is that the democracy you love? One that only works when you're winning? AOC's voice rose, her tone sharp and personal now. Don't lecture me on democracy. I've had death threats for defending working families. I've stood alone on the House floor fighting for change while people like you stood behind a podium defending chaos. Karoline slammed her hand softly on the table, just enough for the mic to catch it. And I've stood in briefing rooms, packed with hostile reporters twisting my every word. I've walked into buildings where no one wanted me there, but I still spoke. That's not chaos, that's courage. The room pulsed with tension. Even the camera operators had stopped shifting lenses, frozen by the back and forth. AOC's voice dropped suddenly. You want a medal for surviving a press room? Try surviving poverty. Try walking through housing projects every day, growing up with no security detail. You want to compare scars, Karoline? I've got more than you'll ever understand. But Karoline didn't flinch. And I won't wear my life like armor to deflect accountability. I honor where I came from, but I don't weaponize it. You want truth? Here it is. Your ideas may sound good on TikTok, but they collapse under the weight of reality. Another burst of applause erupted, this time from both ends of the audience, a moment of rare overlap. David Lang raised his voice over the clamor. All right, we're going to take a question from the audience. But as a young woman stood up from the crowd, Karoline and AOC never broke eye contact. Two women, two visions, no retreat. A young woman stood from the audience, mic in hand. She looked barely out of college, plaid blazer, notebook in her lap, nervous energy vibrating from her fingers, but her voice came out clear. My name's Allison. I'm a Yale political science student. My question is for both of you. What do you say to young Americans who feel politically homeless, like neither party truly represents us anymore? The room shifted. Applause flared briefly, but Karoline was the first to respond. She leaned forward, voice steady. I say this. Don't look for a party to complete you. Look for principles that don't shift with the wind. I believe in freedom. I believe in borders, in law and order, in empowering families to build their own futures. You might not agree with everything I say, but you will always know where I stand. Then, turning to AOC, she added, You don't need to tear America down to rebuild it. AOC didn't miss a beat. And I say this, being politically homeless doesn't mean giving up. It means you're seeing clearly. The system was built to serve the powerful. We're here to shake that system. I fight for the working class, for racial justice, for climate justice. If that makes me radical to you, then fine. Call me radical. But I'm real. She turned to Karoline with fire. What you call strength is submission. You serve a man who brags more than he builds, who tweets more than he leads. That's not principle, that's performance. Karoline blinked slowly. And yet here you are, performing like the rest of us. Isn't that the irony, Congresswoman? The moderator attempted to redirect. Let's take another audience question. But the feed suddenly shifted. On the studio monitors, a tweet from AOC's account appeared, dated the week before. It read, Karoline Leavitt is the face of fascist normalization, a dangerous pretty puppet with no voice of her own. Gasps broke out. It hadn't been referenced until now. David Lang froze. We weren't supposed to show that, but Karoline had already seen it. She turned her gaze slowly to AOC. You said that, didn't you? AOC, caught off guard, hesitated. Yes, and I stand by it. The crowd stirred again, murmurs spreading like static. Karoline's tone dropped an octave. You call me a puppet, dangerous, pretty, all in one sentence. Congratulations, you just insulted every young woman in America who dared to have an opinion while wearing lipstick. AOC folded her arms, her voice tight. You're not just a woman with an opinion. You're a megaphone for a movement that silences others. Karoline reached into her jacket. The room hushed. She pulled out a crumpled piece of paper and slowly unfolded it on the table. It wasn't a government memo or a press statement. It was the printed tweet. Highlighted, annotated. She held it up to the camera. You wanted this moment, Congresswoman? You got it. Then, in one slow, deliberate motion, Karoline tore the tweet in half, right down the middle, and let the pieces fall like feathers on the desk. The audience erupted. Shock, roars, a few boos. But the dominant sound was applause, rising, surging. AOC's jaw tightened. David Lang tried to speak, but no one could hear him. Karoline sat back, hands folded calmly. Next time you want to challenge me, do it face to face, not from behind a screen. The stage didn't belong to anyone anymore. But Karoline had just seized the moment and no one in that room could deny it. The room had shifted, not just in noise or posture, but in energy. What began as a civil forum had morphed into something undeniable, a battle for moral authority between two rising figures of their generation. Karoline had just torn AOC's tweet in half on live television, and that paper now lay in shreds between them, like a dividing line no moderator could erase. For the first time that evening, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez hesitated. She sat still, arms crossed, lips slightly parted as if words were on the way but hadn't yet decided which route to take. Her usual sharpness, that Bronx-honed fire, flickered uncertainly. The crowd felt it, and Karoline saw it. But Karoline didn't gloat. She leaned forward, her tone softer now, but still unsparing. "Congresswoman, you called me a puppet, but let's be honest. You're not here just to discuss policy. You're here to protect your brand. You trade in rage and righteousness because it sells. And I don't blame you, it works. But don't mistake theatrics for leadership." The moderator looked relieved someone was using a calm voice again. "Let's return to the core issue," he offered. "Immigration reform." AOC cut in, tone firm. "You want to talk about branding? Your entire existence is a cosplay of 1950s conservatism wrapped in MAGA hashtags. You say you speak for families, but whose families? You claim to speak for America, but which America?" Karoline answered instantly, eyes locked. "The one that still believes in the Constitution, in merit, in borders. The one that doesn't think every issue is solved by shouting equity louder." "Equity," AOC repeated, her voice sharp again, "isn't a slogan. It's about acknowledging that some of us didn't start this race at the same line. You're proud of the bootstraps you pulled yourself up by. But some people weren't even given boots, Karoline." The crowd applauded. It was one of her strongest lines yet. Karoline nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch before responding. "And my family didn't have much. We worked hard. I cleaned diners, Congresswoman. I wasn't handed this. But I also didn't blame the system every time I failed. I didn't scream into cameras. I got better. I got tougher." Something shifted again. A low rumble of respect from the crowd. Some even began nodding across the ideological divide. AOC, sensing the tide, tried to strike harder. "You pretend you're not political theater, but tearing that tweet wasn't policy. It was a stunt." Karoline didn't flinch. "It was a line that needed to be drawn. You crossed it when you decided that a young woman who disagrees with you isn't just wrong. She's dangerous. That's what authoritarians do, not feminists." A murmur of surprise pulsed through the audience. AOC leaned back in her chair, quiet. The moderator glanced between them like a tennis umpire lost in a final set with no end. "I think," he said carefully, "we've reached a moment where both perspectives have clearly been voiced." Karoline cut in, calm and final. "Number not yet." She turned to the crowd, voice clear. "I want every young woman watching this, conservative, liberal, independent, to understand something. You don't need anyone's permission to speak. Not mine, not hers. And if they try to silence you with labels, tear them apart." And with that, the air didn't just shift, it crystallized. Karoline had reclaimed the word puppet and rewired it into something unshakable: defiance. Karoline's words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Not loud, not blaring, but lingering in a way no one could ignore. The studio was silent, not from absence of thought, but from the weight of what had just been said. A young conservative woman branded as a puppet had refused the insult, not by counterpunch but by declaration. And in doing so, she'd flipped the narrative. AOC's jaw tightened. She wasn't used to being disarmed on stage. She was, after all, a master of the moment, of viral clips of meme-worthy mic drops. But Karoline hadn't given her a soundbite to mock. She'd given her a mirror. "That's a nice speech," AOC said finally, her tone regaining edge. "But don't pretend what you represent isn't dangerous. You stand with a movement that's tried to erase healthcare rights, strip environmental protections, and bury minority voices under a smiling patriotism banner." Karoline raised an eyebrow. "And you stand with a movement that cloaks federal overreach in moral superiority. You call border enforcement racist, the Constitution outdated, and anyone who pushes back a threat to democracy. Who's erasing who, Congresswoman? The audience gasped. It wasn't just the words, it was the clarity. The moderator leaned forward nervously, his fingers steepled. Let's try to steer back to the issues. But AOC wouldn't let it go. You claim to be independent, but your every word echoes Trump's talking points. Do you even believe what you say, or are you just playing the part? Karoline's voice dropped an octave. I was raised by a single mother in New Hampshire. I paid my way through school. I've sat at tables where no one expected me to speak. I don't play anything, Alexandria. I fight for what I believe. And if that sounds familiar to you, maybe it's because you forgot how you started. For the first time, AOC looked unsure. Not defeated, never that, but reflective. It was a crack, a moment of recognition, even if fleeting. Then Karoline did something unexpected. She stood. Her posture wasn't confrontational, and it was grounding, as if the floor beneath her mattered more than the argument. She looked directly at the camera. To everyone watching, politics doesn't belong to the loudest voice. It belongs to the one that shows up. I don't care if you're MAGA or progressive. If you're afraid to speak, don't be. I've been called names, shouted down, but I'm still here because silence isn't strength, and I refuse to be silent. AOC remained seated, arms crossed, but her glare had softened. The arena, though still divided, had begun to tilt, not because Karoline had crushed her opponent, but because she had risen above her. And in that rising, she hadn't just answered the insult. She'd turned it into armor. The moderator, sensing a shift in the room, cleared his throat. Thank you, Ms. Leavitt. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, would you like to respond? AOC uncrossed her arms slowly. Her usual fire hadn't gone out, but it had dimmed just enough to feel like the wind was changing. She glanced at Karoline, then turned back to the camera. Fine, she said, voice calm but taut. You want to talk about showing up? Let's talk about what showing up really means. It means fighting for the working class. It means calling out billionaires and polluters even when it's unpopular. It means standing with immigrants, LGBTQ youth, and anyone this system leaves behind. Karoline didn't flinch. And I respect that, she replied. But showing up also means asking the tough questions, like why our borders are overwhelmed, why crime is rising, and why families can't afford groceries under your policies. The crowd stirred again. Not jeers this time, but the quiet buzz of a live audience realizing they were no longer watching a typical cable debate. This wasn't just red versus blue, this was raw versus rehearsed. AOC leaned forward, eyes sharp. You think you're brave because you stood on this stage and said what every right-wing pundit says from their Twitter feed? That's not courage, that's branding. Karoline shook her head. No. What's branding is turning every disagreement into oppression. You want to label me as MAGA? Fine. But then own what you are too. You're the face of a movement that talks equality but punishes dissent. That calls border agents fascists while ignoring the fentanyl crisis tearing through our communities. The moderator tried again to interject, but neither woman yielded. AOC, visibly agitated now, snapped. You act like nuance is weakness, like compassion is a liability. But when your movement demonizes everyone who doesn't agree, who are you helping? Karoline didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. I helped the mom who lost her son to an overdose because the border was open. I helped the business owner who shut down because your tax hikes crushed her. I help people you say you care about, by actually listening to them instead of lecturing them. The room was silent again. Not frozen in hostility, but in reconsideration. Karoline had shifted the ground beneath them. She hadn't shouted AOC down. She'd outlasted her. And in politics, sometimes surviving the fire is more powerful than throwing it. AOC sat back, her expression unreadable now, not shaken but recalibrating. For once, she wasn't dominating the moment. The crowd's silence had become a kind of verdict, or at least a pause in their judgment. She reached for her water, took a sip, then turned to Karoline with a forced calmness that only made the tension sharper. "You don't get it," AOC said. "You think this is about winning an argument on live TV? It's not. It's about shaping the future. And while your team clings to the past, to walls and fear and talking points, we're building something real, something that includes everyone." Karoline didn't blink. The future doesn't belong to the loudest person in the room. It belongs to the people who are struggling, the people you forgot the moment you walked into Congress and started playing celebrity. The moderator, now visibly exhausted, leaned in again. "Ladies, let's try to—" But Karoline stood up, slowly, calmly, not to grandstand win, but to make sure the camera could see her as she reached into her blazer pocket. She pulled out a folded piece of paper, the same one AOC had mocked earlier. She held it high, then placed it on the table between them. "This," she said, voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "is a letter from a Bronx mother. Single mom, works 2 jobs. Her son died of a fentanyl overdose last fall. She wrote this to your office, begged for help, no reply." AOC's jaw tensed. Karoline continued, "She sent me a copy and asked me to read it if I ever got the chance. Tonight's her chance, and I won't let her be invisible to you." The moderator went silent. A camera zoomed in on the letter. Karoline didn't read it aloud. She didn't need to. Just the fact that she brought it, that she had it, said everything. The image of that letter, resting between them like a wedge of truth, shattered the narrative. This wasn't just a clash of ideologies anymore. It had become a reckoning. One side offered slogans, the other a name, a mother, a story that couldn't be fact-checked away. The audience didn't erupt this time. They breathed. And for the first time that night, AOC had no comeback. Karoline sat back down, steady, the table between them now holding not just words, but weight. The silence lingered, not awkward but powerful, heavy, the kind that follows a truth too big to debate, too personal to dismiss. AOC glanced at the letter again. For the first time all night, she didn't look defiant. She looked stuck. Karoline didn't press her advantage. She didn't smirk or gloat. Instead, she leaned forward and spoke with clarity, not as a political figure, but as someone simply unwilling to be dismissed. "You called me a MAGA puppet," she said, her voice steady. "But here's what I am. I'm a daughter of working-class parents. I'm a woman who earned her place without a political machine behind her. And I'm a voice for the people you forgot when the spotlight found you." OC shifted uncomfortably. "You think this makes you right?" Karoline tilted her head, eyes fierce but calm. "It makes me real." The moderator looked stunned, unsure whether to wrap up or let the electricity hang. He turned toward the audience. "That's all the time we have tonight." But Karoline stood again, eyes locked on AOC. "And one more thing," she said. "Next time someone calls me a puppet on national television, they better be ready for me to bring the receipts. Because I'm not here to entertain, I'm here to represent. And I don't back down." Then she turned to the camera. "To the moms watching at home, to the business owners, the students, the police officers, the people who get labeled and ignored, I see you. And I will never stop speaking for you." A smattering of applause turned into a wave. The moderator tried to maintain composure, but even he cracked a small smile. AOC remained seated, quiet, processing. Karoline walked off the stage, alone, no entourage, no fanfare, just the sound of the crowd rising, not for a celebrity but for someone who came armed not with slogans, but with something stronger, truth. Backstage, producers rushed, reporters fired off headlines, social media exploded. Clips of Karoline's final words trended within minutes. She didn't flinch. She flipped the script. She walked into the lion's den and came out leading the pride. And on her way out the building, as the cameras tried to catch up, Karoline simply turned to one aide and whispered, "Let them come." I've got more letters. In a world where voices are often silenced by labels and headlines, Karoline Leavitt chose a different path. She faced the attacks, tore through the narrative, and reminded a nation that conviction still matters more than clout. This wasn't just a debate. It was a statement. AOC tried to frame her as a puppet. But Karoline didn't just break the frame, she shattered it, live on air. She stood for something more than sound bites: truth, courage, and the forgotten voices of everyday Americans. Because when the script is stacked against you, sometimes the boldest move is to tear it up. If this moment inspired you, subscribe now and join the movement, because Karoline's just getting started.